once again to the show that you all love. It's called We Mortal Coils. And it's a very special episode, actually. I mentioned this in our Discord the other day, but this is more or less our 1 year anniversary episode.
Really?
We've been doing this for a year.
Wow.
The other day, I was like, how long have we been doing this podcast? Like, I have never checked. And then I checked, and it was December 14th, which was yesterday, I guess.
Well, then I'm forced to ask you a question, right? What episode is this number? Like, is it
42, 30? I think.
42? That's perfect.
So we've missed 10 weeks. We gave ourselves 10 weeks of breaks for the last year. Can you believe that shit?
It's pretty, we worked pretty on top of it. We were pretty on top of it for the thing.
And we have nothing to show for it. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah. Well, we have to show how absurd all of this is,
Right.
I mean,
yes.
That's just, it puts emphasis on the fact that, much like Coca-Cola, we will be forgotten one day.
And what
Still
more
a little bit faster
in Trevor's favor here would be more perfect and quaint than us taking an entire year to reach the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
It is episode 42, isn't it?
Yeah.
We finally did it after a year of philosophical discussion.
Yeah,
we've arrived.
We should eventually do a watching party of Monty Python's The Meaning of Life.
I've never seen it.
Really?
Never seen it.
Oh man, what a classic!
And it's such a coincidence because I just watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail today. Like just a few hours ago.
First time?
Well, no, not the first time.
About
no,
to say,
no.
Jesus Christ.
I'm obsessed with that movie. But no, so like Brad's girlfriend had never seen it. And it's been like more than a year since I've seen it. So I was just like, just watch it. Why not?
Yeah.
Gotta see it once every 6 months, I feel.
So, not sure if there's any correlation here with our, 42th episode.
Not really.
42.
It's all right.
But we happen to be talking about the atomic bomb is the topic for today's discussion.
That's right.
Implications. What do you think about this? Is this going to be our doom? Is this going to be our answer to the Fermi paradox?
That's usually the way I think about it.
Yeah. It's the most devastating weapon of our times next to, or that's at least let's put it this way, that's been used already. There's also,
I think it's pretty fair to say
the hydrogen bomb, but I don't think
it's the greatest weapon we've ever devised beside religion.
Oh, Oh, he's getting them in early.
I mean, look, I haven't done this in a while. All right,
right.
Gotta collect them.
He's been stocking up. Anyways, well said. So yeah, we're gonna start today just going around and tell me, as well as our listener, what, if you can remember, the earliest memories you have of encountering the concept or just the idea of the atomic bomb. And then maybe close out with a little bit of like, what's your general demeanor, your general attitude towards our current state of affairs in regards to that? I know that might be presented a little bit weirdly, but like somebody in the 1950s might have a very different visualization of how they relate to the atomic bomb, or somebody in the 80s might have a very different opinion. It's like, well, how do you feel today? So yeah. Any takers?
I'm itching to talk, but like I definitely want for someone to go first.
All right. Well, all right. I guess that means me. This is an interesting question. Mostly because I feel like I might be a bad person to ask. In that, the first part of your question was, when was the first time you had ever encountered this idea of nukes or nuclear annihilation or atomic bombs or all that? Well, and I'm certain this is also true for most of our listeners, and also certain it's true for both of y'all. This is part of my existence, more or less. Like, it's part of my paradigm in a way. It's a bit like, when did you find out that Darth Vader was Luke's father? I don't quite. It's more like, it's not an episodic.
Or closer. Yeah. Where were you at 9/11?
Yeah. Well, what I'm trying to connect it to here is to say that, well, I don't really have an episodic memory as to when I found out that Darth Vader was Luke's father. It's more or less just part of my personality. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the framework from which I engage with pop culture, I guess. But if you move backward and over and talk about this whole thing about nuclear annihilation, it's kind of more or less part of the human paradigm for me. It's as far as it is to be Trevor, as far as it is to abstract the way that I encounter reality, part of that is the possibility that the nation states that we exist within are capable of destroying the planet. And I know what you're going to say, like, okay, so there you are, and that's the answer to the question. But I think the implications of that are actually kind of profound. Like, psychologically, I mean, what kind of feeling of dominance that must give someone, in a sense, compared to someone who completely lacks that sensation. Like, compare a medieval person or an ancient person who is familiar with old ancient empires, feels as if they're in a state of decline or whatever they are presently are. At no point do they ever have this conception of reality where it's mankind as this not only superintendent but super deleter. They have access to a red button that could end this entire planet, or at the very least could fundamentally change it irreversibly at any time. Like, we have that ability. Psychologically, that's a new thing. That's very unique to us. That's very unique to this and the middle of last century. It's a new development still. I mean, it's a new development that you and I have been born into, and it's part of what we are. But it is new, and the implications of it, I think, are still not perfectly understood. And I'm talking about like the way that we encounter it right now. You could be, if you want, an optimist and say that, like, it'll be this thing where, psychologically unusable, therefore not used, or something like that. Like, how could you possibly imagine destroying the planet? How could anyone see themselves pressing the button? But you could also look at it from the other perspective of, well, it's just a matter of time. It is. I mean, if you have X amount of years and you have this red button, it's a bit like so I'll end with this because
the chances of it being pressed
increase.
Just add up.
Yeah, exactly. Here's one funny point, and I'll end on this. And of course, I'm going to end on this, but with the myth of Sisyphus. One thing I think Camus says in his work on the myth of Sisyphus himself, he mentions, well, there's nothing actually, if you go into the mythology, into the folk story of the myth of Sisyphus, that actually compels Sisyphus to push the boulder up the hill. There is actually nothing happening that, like, if you don't, then your liver will be pulled out or something. No, it's just that you are here. This is the mountain. That's the boulder. And now we have time. And there you are. That's what is available to you, and you have all of eternity, and that is quite literally the thing.
Sisyphus is a myth, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
But he goes without time, so, like, in other words, he experiences it all. So in other words, like, eventually he'd be left with the conclusion, right, of why not just push it up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's just nothing else to do. There's just nothing else to do. Like quite literally. And the reason why I bring that up is if you have the ability to completely annihilate the planet, it sometimes, I'm not going to just like die. I'm not going to die on this hill because I in the end don't entirely think it's true. But I think at times it feels as if it's one of those things that is just going to happen. I don't know when, but it will. Same thing with gray goo or anything else. Like, something will eventually happen that will cause a very serious calamity in that regard. Nuclear annihilation.
It's so strange, right? Because Trevor and I literally are going to start off our points the same exact way, just worded differently, right? But we have slightly different conclusions. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that the words that popped in my head, the moment Bray started asking this question, and for those of you out there, listening and watching, before the episode, Bray just told us what this was about. Okay. Like, this is totally off the cuff for me and Trevor, and it's important. And so anyway, the words I came up with it for it were, it's the Excalibur of our time. Okay. Like it is the sword of power. Okay. And we wield it like one to our demise and doom. You know what I'm saying? Much like Uther and Arthur and the rest of them, we will condemn ourselves to live the life of our foolish stories if we're not careful. Okay, but the truth is, it's not a weapon. It's very simply the energy currency of the universe. Okay, and we spend it how we like. All right. So, in other words, all that nuclear fuel could maybe one day be heat for the home, or whatever. Obviously it can't be, food. Can't do that, but it can power the technology that makes food cheaper, and so on. That we credit so much to people, but what I tell my students all the time is like, we're scientists who like discover things so often name things after other people, and they always tell me, why do they do that? I'm like, because they're trying to tell you something really, really hard. They're begging you to understand that this discovery doesn't belong to them. It belongs to everybody. All right. So the science that led us here, right, is becoming our old myth. Like Trevor was talking about earlier, it's part of our paradigm. It's part of our social contract at this point. You know what I mean? Like there's such a widespread knowledge about the bomb and so on. So like my personal experience with it was very mythos. And in my childhood, I was hearing stories of all kinds, right? So the first way I encountered the bomb was very antiseptic. It was just History Channel. It was just documentaries. It was just, Science Channel, whatever. I mean, I watched them so much when I was a kid, and I'm very happy that probably no one knew exactly what I was looking into at that time. You know what I mean? If they had, I'd probably be turned my nose back into a certain book. But and it was very, very antiseptic. But at the same time, I was watching things like Star Wars and reading the Bible. And what do those all have to do with each other, right? Well, like, I'm trying to create a narrative in my head, like all of us. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, surely it's not that bad. Like, surely we'll get to a point where, we can create stuff as easily as we can destroy it. Just like in Star Trek, just like, God speaking things into existence. Surely we can like get there at some point. No, we can't. And so like, as I became educated, the bomb TM, you know what I mean, started to devastate me at a whole new level. And I want to explain to anybody out there who might actually find themselves in that state, that I had in, childhood, so to speak, where it's just like, okay, surely we can do something about it, right? Surely if the bombs drop, surely things will go on moving, right? No, they won't. They can't. If we detonate a kind of critical level of nuclear bombs in the atmosphere, there's no ecosystem. There's no supporting scaffolding or structure beneath your very insulated position in nature. There's nothing. There's nothing to hold you up at this precipitous place, and you will plummet all the way down. And we'll all die. Everybody.
I don't know how I can follow that. No. Yeah, so my experience is probably pretty similar to yours, Stefan, in that like my great grandfather was in the Air Force, and I grew up partially with them, and so he would watch the History Channel a lot because it had a lot of sort of content that he was interested in. And no doubt I probably was exposed to, the ideas of the atomic bomb there, or even just in regular schooling, in learning about history, we talk about that. But I also got a great deal of time spent in sort of popular culture with those sort of ideas, whether it was, playing video games like Fallout, or through sort of exaggerated means, like just like in Star Wars, you know, the ability to just blow up an entire planet. It can seem pretty outlandish to us, but in really, you know, in reality, it's just an extension of an atomic bomb. So I have to say, how I feel about it today, I have mixed emotions, and part of that is probably because I live very close to an important Air Force base. But that being said, I do wonder about like the probability of the next major world conflict occurring in my lifetime, because we're rapidly approaching, you know, 100 years since the last World War. You know, that anniversary will be in my lifetime, you know, God's willing. But I just wonder, like, what would it take for a weapon like that to be used again in the field of battle? Because you guys all saw Oppenheimer, right? The
good movie,
phenomenal. And so obviously, the United States is still the only nation to have ever used a nuclear weapon in like wartime,
in conflict,
like in conflict. And I just wonder, how long it's gonna remain that way? What I mean, what are your general opinion? We don't have to do a deep dive into the history here, because, you know, this is sort of a topic that some people bounce back and forth. Although I don't think I've ever really debated anybody on this, but it's just the idea of, like, should the United States have dropped the atomic bombs in World War II?
It's tough.
You asked me that question.
Yeah,
I see.
People, well, you know, people bounce back and forth between, you know, no, they shouldn't have because it's an atrocity. But it, you know, and then the opposition will say, well, you know, we were about to have to invade Japan, mainland Japan, and the whole idea was that, you know, the Japanese people were not going to surrender by any means, and that this invasion of the mainland of Japan would have been incredibly costly for both sides. And so I guess that is probably part of what went into the decision-making process for the use of the first atomic bomb. But people still go back and forth and say they still would have surrendered even if we didn't use it, maybe even before the invasion got pretty far underway. I don't know.
I suspect that's not true, due to the nature of the conflict at that point and the state of the conflict and how it had went on all of the islands leading up to what would have been the invasion of Japan by the United States. All of the indications were that it was going to be very, very, very drawn out conflict that would have been much more infamous and well known than Normandy, for example. It would have been on a much larger scale of death and of work to get to that point. It was all in all a very serious concern on everyone's part, that conflict. I could see an argument to be made that we shouldn't have used the second one. In fact, I've seen a couple documentaries on this very topic, and very often that's become a talking point or a frame of reference for approaching this problem in Japan. A lot of people speak of well, the first one I can understand, but you shouldn't have used the second one. That's a very often thought of argument.
I feel like that's such a fence-sitting position. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
It is really unique position to
take. Yeah,
because it's like okay, well, you deserve the first one, but the second one's just like a, you know, fuck you, like kick them while they're down.
Like but like you either interpret it as, you know, Truman's "fuck you," perhaps, okay, or you interpret it as we were really, really trying to convince them that we had more. And if you detonate just one, the thought may occur to the enemy, might have been the only one ahead. And then the second one's like, nope, they've got.
You know what's really funny about that? That was in fact the last one that we had.
Well, no, but you get what I'm saying. Like you detonate two to try and convince them, like, no, dude, we've got more.
I see where you're coming from.
And we only had the two. You're completely correct, but we're trying to fool them.
Very much so. So I honestly don't think we'll have too much discussion on this particular topic, because I can only assume that we all feel about the same way on this. I'm curious if anyone disagrees.
It's a bit settled. You know
it
what I mean?
is a bit settled. I mean, quite literally,
I'm just doing speculation, you know, like in the sense of like, well, if somebody were to say, well, we shouldn't have done those, and we ended up in a place where, you know, we could say that we still won, but at great costs to people. The fact that the atomic bomb would not have been used yet, like I wonder if people would feel any differently about it, not knowing.
Well, so I have a quick question, and you two might know a bit more than I.
Yeah, sure.
How out of the two bombs, which, if any, were used on military targets?
I believe they both were. It's just that it was so large. It also, in fact,
there's no way it contained itself to the military target. Of course not.
That's the essential thing.
That's what I thought. I thought they were both, you know, more or less, because like you're saying, it's always more or less with a nuclear bomb, more or less a military target.
One thing to note is the United States had already firebombed Japan quite sincerely at that point.
Right?
Those firebombs overall. Here's one thing I really want to stress about this whole atomic bomb thing. Before the atomic bomb was used, it was just, you know, it was a very special bomb. Don't get me wrong. The Manhattan Project and all the work that went into it, and people knew how absolutely pivotal and huge it was. You know, I am become death, all of that sort of thing. But I want to note here that speaking of megatons of destruction, like the United States had already well surpassed that degree of destruction on Japan already, just using firebombs and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
being used in places like Kyoto with a wooden city being completely utterly destroyed, many people killed.
And we're talking about, and it's on the order of 100,000 deaths from the firebombing alone.
Exactly. So I want to reframe it a little bit, and we have to kind of pick what ethical standard we want or moral framework we want to approach this from. We choose one, and then we can go through. And I think I could probably convince you under most ethical frameworks that it is in fact valid to have used the bombs at that time.
If you want to be real quick, Trevor, I just picked up another piece of data that I didn't know. That's why I looked it up. So the fire bombings had a lot of injuries besides, but like it for sure killed about 100,000 people. But Hiroshima was 140,000 people. Nagasaki was 74 all on its own. So we're talking about we're not talking about an order of magnitude greater, but we are talking about twice as many. You know.
So that being said, I want, this is kind of the angle that I'm trying to wedge in here is, consider data aside, let's consider the psyche of a human being, in the sense that while we could have had, you know, let's even say even if the firebombing exceeded by far the number of people that were killed by the atomic bombs, was 9/11 mentioned when we were on air, or was that before we got started?
No, yeah, I think so. I like because that's kind of where it's kind of where we need to bump, you know, with the Japanese people at that time. I know it's completely different and so on, but
right. You know. Well, and I think maybe you kind of understand where I'm going with that, is that it was the act of 9/11. It was watching the television, you know, as these buildings. Yeah. It was an incredibly emotional moment that spanned an entire country of the world, really. Same goes for the atomic bombs, and as much as there's a really weird coincidence there. You know, people watched one happen, and then not much later, another one happened again.
Devastating.
Well, in the events of 9/11, there were 3, but eyes were on the towers, not necessarily the Pentagon or you know, the field in Pennsylvania. But you get what I'm saying, is that all of that, and I think what is it? I think 9/11 deaths were just under 3,000, like by 4. This says just off a quick search. So let's say
about 2,800 or more than a little more than 2,800. I think. Let me see.
That many people died, which not trying to discredit any deaths from 9/11, but compared to many things, even that have happened just in the time since 2001 to now, COVID killed vastly more people than 9/11, and yet we don't have the same sort of like
visceral.
Yeah, that's exactly the word I'm looking for. Visceral emotion towards this strain of coronavirus than we do for 9. You know, we didn't go to war.
Well, Bray,
for
I
years.
think I have two thoughts on that real quick. One is time frame, right? So COVID can kill orders of magnitude more people, but in such a longer frame of time that people kind of have like a breath, you know?
Well, even the fire bombs, you know, bombings may last for weeks or months.
That's what I was going to say, is that, like, you know, the fire bombings have this element of time, right? Germs have an element of time. COVID had an element of time. The bomb was hitherto unseen.
Yeah, let me ask you this. What, in your mind, and this may not go the way I'm thinking, but in your mind, to you, what is the scariest part about an atomic bomb?
You ever see that scene from Terminator 2?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Let me describe it to the audience.
Honestly, I could not have asked for a better
answer.
That is
so yeah, that scene where like the bomb goes off and then immediately her skin is shot off of her skeleton as it holds onto that metal fence. And then like that's just the first blast, and then like the ricochet of the blast or whatever that was.
Of course, the air column coming.
Yeah, the air column hits, and then that's what turns the skeleton, which had its skin and flesh thrown off of it. And then like the next ricochet hits, and then the bones turn to dust. Yeah, but completely inaccurate. But that does pretty
right.
I was gonna say,
we got the slow-mo version.
I think at that distance that she was at, she'd just be vaporized. Just completely and totally vaporized.
Yeah, she would be a shade on the on the
at
pavement.
the very least, that would be well within like fireball, like major third degree burns. Like,
well, no, because like I realized that, you know, she was pretty far away from the bomb, old Sarah, but at the same time, you know, the bombs are so much bigger. You know, even when that movie was made.
Yeah, you know, bombs, hydrogen bombs. I mean, there's really nothing you have to do at this point when it comes to hydrogen bombs. They're pretty brutal. Like I've heard discussions on this where like they're of a sufficient size, and if you consider like the fire radius, like how much would be destroyed and burned down just from the explosion.
Totally destroyed.
Yeah, we don't need to improve things any further. Like we have more than enough nukes to destroy the planet, and or to at least destroy everything that's feasibly important to destroy.
Like bare minimum Stone Age for humankind.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. What was the guy?
Yeah.
Was it what was his name? I'm trying to think of the guy, the physicist that was like rock hard about developing the hydrogen bomb.
I do know who you're referring to, but I don't remember the name.
They made the meme after the movie where there was like, until somebody makes a bigger one, you know?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I also want to mention one thing y'all were talking about a second ago about like comparisons between 9/11 and like the atomic bombs. I do think there are some other aspects to this that we should probably touch on, like what makes them so different and why. I just checked; it's 2,977 deaths during 9/11, and the numbers from earlier, the 150,000 with one bomb and the 72,000 with the other. I do want to note here some important differences. Like the first one would be the time and the place. Of course, I mean it's quite obvious. We're living like that's a time period. Like that is a like heroic age as far as it gets. Like as far as it gets, that's a heroic age, to say the very least. It matches that time and period, the 1940s, like the world at war. I think will be encountered in the same way that we look at the Iliad or something like that. You know, grand scale conflict, beautiful poetry, heroic lives lived. People heroic. They call it the heroic generation for a reason. There's a particular thing happening in that time period, and that exists within that scale. I remember just recently I had a conversation with a friend, and she had mentioned why is it that it's all relative? Why is it that when I like undergo something now and today, it's traumatic, when it's like this, when like on the other side of the world, people are being killed in their homes, like bombs are falling and destroying, and insert Ukraine or Gaza or wherever else you want to think, or Syria. Uh, why is it that like why is it all so relative? And we can touch on that if you want to explore that question, we can. But I just want to put emphasis on the fact that it is all relative. It's all based within a scale. It's all based within a way of measuring. Like and this is a strange tangent in itself. But
I think
please
let me make sure I get what you're saying correctly. So like, say I was a very unfortunate soul, and like I was born in a war-torn country where 3,000 deaths is Tuesday, right? Is what you're saying, like, because we are so like civilized and so just like that kind of death and murder just does not happen in our daily lives. We have no, we're super sensitive to it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, technically. What I don't mean to say, although I will change one word, it wouldn't be so far as civilized. I like that word, and I think that there is weight and usability to that word in speaking about this, but I think it's just different. It's just a different scale. It's just a different place.
Well, I'm not calling people unfortunate enough to be in war-torn countries uncivilized. I would never say that. What I'm trying to suggest is that our lives are so much more orderly and so much more predictable than, say, a child, abducted into labor by some South American organization, or I've got Breaking Bad on the brain. And then of course, like any one of these war-torn places, that level of death is so much more common than we would understand.
Yeah, it's a bit like this. In 1942, we weren't actually quite certain if democracy was going to win. Like, I mean, we could talk about like the way that
that's so bizarre to think about nowadays,
isn't it? And I think that's what I want to stress in this, like the fact that is so strange nowadays. But at that time period, the coin was up in the air, and that from that pole, seeing that coin go up in the air and you're watching it flip, from that pole is from where you waited and engaged with reality. And you have things like the fire bombings in Dresden. You have things like the London Blitz. You have things like the terrible stuff happening in Africa or in China. But forget about Africa for a second. Just China. What happened in Manchuria? You work on that scale as you watch that coin flip in the air, and it all can fit within that pole. You can kind of make sense of reality based according to those means. But move forward a couple centuries. Move forward just a century or two, and well, here we are, just one century, a little less than 1 century ahead, and reality has reached such a degree of stability that, especially after the end of the Cold War, like right at the end of the Soviet Union,
after the climax,
Yeah, after the climax, yes. At that rising action, I mean, people started talking about the end of history. Like that was the perspective. This is the end of history. History has ended.
But all that's left now is that they got their shit together. At least, enough such that we lived.
Yes. Well, no, I can do nothing but praise the heroic generation. But they're called the heroic generation for a reason. But here we are in this current state of extreme stability, where the assumption is it's the end of history and everything's left to be swept up. Well, I mean to say this going into September 11th, 2001. And then just like that, history didn't end. And I think that's the relative position from where you're measuring all this. You're going from, like, one is it's in the air, it's up in the air. Here's 1942. It's hard to exactly say what's going to happen. It's hard to say. And then here we are at this period in 2001, where we're at a point of stability, and then it falters. The amount of deaths, I mean, that is really quite important, because people do know people who died in 9/11. But I want to just stress the fact that it's also the change in the culture, the change in the way that we're approaching reality at that moment. It shakes your assumptions, and it also. And y'all mentioned COVID a second ago. I think another agency thing here, or another thing we need to mention, is agency. The fact is, like, COVID lacks agency as far as we're aware, as far as we can know.
It makes it totally different.
It's similar to a tsunami or a hurricane.
Just for our posterity, I did look up the COVID death count, and the the easiest thing I could see was more than 1 million. You know,
there we are.
not more than 2. You know,
and it's
by the way, that's in this country alone.
Wow.
So I mean, completely dwarfing all the numbers we set up to this point. But I love how you said that it lacks that human intent.
Yeah.
You know,
someone destroyed those towers. I mean, that's the fatal
right.
Yeah, they didn't destroy themselves. The entropy did not do that. You know.
Well, yeah.
I wonder if you were to go on the streets and ask people which would they rather deal with again? Like which tragedy would they rather go through again? Just on the street, no prep time, nothing. Just pure right there on the street. Say, if you had to live through one of these times again, which would you rather, 9/11 or COVID?
But you could only poll people who would live through both as an adult.
Yeah. Or something comparable, something with a comparable margin of, you know, impact.
Right.
Oh, well, I say that, but you know, you get what I'm saying. Something like 9/11 versus, you know,
here we go. Almost like you'd ask people in our generation, which crisis would you live through again? You have to pick one. COVID, Ukraine war. Ukraine was not even done,
and that one's an even different, slightly different, because you know somebody could be going their whole last several years here in the United States and never have even heard of the Ukraine war. You know, they must be living under a rock, in my opinion, but it's possible because it almost in no way materially.
There is some mountaineer in Kentucky who has no idea. About COVID
or
Ukraine,
some kid who's like in high school right now and who has just no idea because there's just, you know, I don't know. But the possibility that, like, the very real possibility that there could be lots of people going, oh, COVID, you know, like, I don't mind having to stay home and, like, you know, work from home or be whatever. And it's like, you know, oh, maybe if I get sick for a little while, you know, some people may not.
Whereas the utilitarian argument would be like so totally, no, dude, whatever else it is, you can't do a pandemic again. Like, you can't do that.
Which I guess is, and that question, that hypothetical is almost like an inverted way of how we started with, like, the discussion about deciding, well, do we do a land invasion of Japan or do we just launch the nuke? Because the nuke's going to be, you know, real quick destruction. It's going to send a message, but it's going to be a lot less people dead than if we had gone for a land invasion overall. And it's like, well, that seems like the, you know, appropriate choice. And then you ask people, you know, which would they rather live in? They're like, well, I want that one with, you know, lots of death.
I have a question for Trevor, if you don't mind, Ray.
Yeah.
So, like, I have a fourth option to talk about, right? And I want to see what you would think about this option. Okay. So, like, we've talked about one, yes, we should have dropped the bombs. No, we shouldn't have. We've talked about we should have done the first one, but, you know, maybe not the second one. Like, that's bullshit. Okay. Like, I'm sorry, whoever's saying that's literally just lack of things to say. Like, they don't have an opinion, but they're trying to have one, you know? Anyway, no offense to people who actually do have good arguments for that. But I want to see what you guys would think about this, right? What if we had, you know, thrown the smaller bomb into, like, the bay, not the bay, but, like, the region around probably Tokyo, you know, except, like, out into the water, like, way out where everyone could more or less still see its devastating power, but you know, it didn't hit anybody. It probably still would have killed a lot of people, don't get me wrong, but not nowhere near as many. Like, and then like, show them that we can do this, and then tell them we have another. You know,
well,
how do you think that would have gone?
How do I think that would have gone? I honestly don't know.
We'd have to ask someone more qualified to give.
Yes, we would. Quite literally, like, you're catching me off guard with this one because I honestly don't know how to encounter it. It's a good question.
I think maybe
it is a good question.
Maybe it would have worked.
It feels like the second part because it's like, okay, if I was an enemy and somebody used their greatest weapon against me, but they like fainted, like they feigned, rather, is what I mean to say. They feigned the attack, basically, like just demonstrated that they could have hit me if they wanted to. It's a warning shot, basically.
That's what I'm saying. A warning shot, a moral warning shot.
And then told me they had another one. Am I more inclined to believe them because they, warned me first?
Do you call the bluff of the United States government?
Right.
I mean,
because it's like, if I was sitting there, I was like, oh, these fools, why would they use their one and only like supreme weapon and not actually hit the target? And then I'm like, well, maybe they just have
but then Japan calls, US bluff, and then we detonate the real bigger bomb. It's bigger this time because I said the smaller one earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We detonate the bigger one in one of our targets, Hiroshima, whatever.
Right.
And then we say, we have another one.
But we don't.
Of course we don't. But they don't need to know that. they do not need to know. Like right now, you have 3 islands in your hands,
sure.
And like they don't need to know that.
We don't need the bluff. Yeah, I get you. Or we don't need to show them our hand. Yeah. The short answer is I don't know.
Right.
Hard to say.
But that's who we are, Trevor. We're unqualified philosophers.
Yep.
There's a philosophy to war.
But that's a good little experiment. That's a good one. That one needs to be presented to a professional.
As I encounter it, I'm trying to say, like, well, they aren't quite easy to make. Like, it did take a lot of work to get, like, Oppenheimer and team to actually bring together all of the material and the industry required in order to make these things, in order to launch them. But like, I'm measuring like that, feeling like, well, we only have these 2 and they're hard to make, and you can only use them you can only use them twice, and like at that point, then we have a huge delay trying to make another one, and that might have a serious impact on the war effort. But at the same time, we're talking about over 200,000 lives. So that's where this gets difficult.
Let me rephrase this, okay, in a much more humorful way.
200,000.
Give me a person who says we should have just dropped the first one, and then like give me a person who gives me like my argument. You know what I mean? About like, okay, well, if you're gonna fence sit about the first one, why not go ahead and just do the warning shot idea? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the people who believe in the first one will eventually devolve into like, maybe the warning shot's the better idea.
Yeah. Yes, I definitely. Perhaps. It didn't. Part of me wants to think that it didn't really occur to the people at that time. but another aspect of that is this.
I guarantee it did.
Well, I think one aspect of it is this, though. I think we want to stress this. These are soldiers. These are people who have been fighting in a conflict for many years at this point. These are people who have been bombing each other for a very long time at this point. Many people had died. A lot of land had been conquered. A lot of people marched to death. A lot of people killed in holes after being forced to dig them. This was a very, very bitter, heroic age. So the way that they had encountered these issues was different, I think. And that's all I can say in encountering this question.
Well,
I don't know.
You're very serious about that, Trevor. Like, I've heard stories about my my mother's father's mother being so racist against anyone who looked remotely Japanese. Like if I remember hearing stories in childhood about this woman, and like a Chinese American or completely unrelated, otherwise unrelated, country to Japan, to China, Korean, whatever, and just because they look similar would like actually freak out. This woman would. I'd never met her. I had never had the displeasure of meeting her. But you guys get what I'm saying. Like, she was raised in that time. And she hated anyone who remotely looked Japanese. So I'm just trying to add weight to what you're saying here, Trevor, that these people were viscerally involved with this other people group.
They were. This really was a coin flip of a civilization. This was a very different time period, much like the time period in the next 10 years is from now. I can only guess. The world's getting very strange.
Let me ask this. So let's turn the situation around now and suppose Japan also has nuclear weapons, and we know, and we've got more of our nuclear weapons. What I mean to say here is that we're extending the scenario out into a situation where we have one country and another country, and both are very well armed in the nuclear capacity. Is mutually assured destruction any good? Like, there's something to be said about the fact that the atomic bomb hasn't been used again since World War II. However, there were some incredibly high tensions during the Cold War, and since then, those tensions have only sort of waned a little bit and seem to. It's like that. It's like the thing, is you let it out of the box, and then every time you have a conflict, it's like the thing that's on everybody's mind. Just like right now, will Iran will will Israel use a weapon of mass destruction, or rather Russia? Will Russia use a nuclear warhead against Ukraine? Like, would they do such a thing?
Would they do that?
And they would be honestly, ridiculously stupid. But
I want to paint a picture, okay, in a complete vacuum. All right, country A assaults country B. Country B repels country A's attack. Country B invades country A. Country A has access to a supreme weapon. Why can't they use it? Tell me one reason why they can't use it. They fucked up by assaulting country B, but now they're might be fighting for their way of life or survival.
It's a very it's a gripping question, because there's a lot of variables, I think, because my instinct is to jump to, well, if we've already experienced an unprovoked assault on another country by country A, and they won't let up, this entire country's way of life is being destroyed, down to the grain, and finally we've turned the tables. It's like, well, even if you were to settle the dispute at the point of ground war and force these people back into their own country, basically bring them to the point of where they would be near surrender. It's like, well, then why can't country A just push the button and completely turn the tide? Because it's not like, it's like catching the snitch in Harry Potter. You practically hit the win button. Unless for some reason we don't really have a whole lot of historical examples of people coming back from an atomic bomb.
Just one.
So my point being is, that's one of the things that worries me the most, is not even so much about Russia. Just to use an example, say they took Ukraine and then start looking for other places in Eastern Europe. It would be Russia's being ransacked and is about to be captured, and they're just going to let everything out with they're going to go out with a bang.
Now obviously the situation's simply not this simple. I mean, right. if the Russians use a bomb, to my understanding, there's a whole chain of events that comes after that, and so on. But
what if Hitler was in the bunker and they were getting ready to, I can't say historically, I'm not a professional, again, I'm no historian, when a nuclear armed Hitler may have decided to use a nuclear weapon. Maybe he would have used that shit as soon as it came out the damn plant. But I'm saying, even if he was held on to that thing until the very last moment and they were in Berlin getting ready to end everything, and he's sitting in the bunker with the gun to his head, I mean, why not just...
Why not?
He had at that point, I've read a little bit on this, he had at that point more or less had given up or felt that the German people had betrayed him.
Right.
And he no longer had cared in that context. And it's under that context that I think... that I personally am under the impression that he would have very voluntarily have destroyed the planet at that, when he knew that the German people had failed him,
and in a way,
in his point of view.
He destroyed his world.
He did.
His whole world.
Completely
I mean,
and totally obliterated.
If you destroy yourself, you destroy your whole world.
It was a deep I can only assume he would come from a deep narcissism, and it would have affected the world, and it had fundamentally changed it in a very fundamental way, and it would have been remembered. It would have been remembered. That's all I'll say there.
Why I'm so wary of anybody with excessive hubris getting anywhere near the capability for nuclear arms.
I knew we were going to take a very winding, circuitous route back
because
to Trump.
And this is
Orange Man has the football.
Orange Man, yeah.
All right.
Listen, so hey, and there's was it shared in our Discord? I think was the was it Michael or Jake, somebody that shared the essay about the end of the age of Hitler. I think it was Jake.
I can't recall.
And it was how, Hitler is the most easily accessible and most popular contemporary, like, historical example that we have that's like the touchstone, like the keystone item that's like the absolute point of reference. Like, it's no longer Jesus anymore, which was a moral... Yeah,
right. It was a polarity thing,
right? Yeah, and now we have a
he's
negative...
the polarity of absolute goodness. If you're taking that perspective,
Hitler was the Antichrist. Very good,
But it's like if Hitler's the worst example we have, and now we can think of a Hitler with nuclear weapons. It's like we're waiting for the next. I mean, that's quite literally what the paper is about. Is like we're waiting on the next Hitler, so to speak.
Here's something really silly.
Persona, there's one born every day. I mean,
Well, they're just not nearly as good at what they're doing.
Level 5 Hitler.
Say what you will, like Adolf Hitler was like,
Oh, Trevor, I would have chosen about 100 better ways to put
that. As masterfully carried out, like it was evil. Like he was really, really, really profoundly good at being an evil person. I mean, that's what he was. So yeah, that's a rarity. It's not an impossibility.
Trevor,
it's just a rarity.
I really disagree.
Please go ahead.
I think we live in a high chaos state, and that the Hitlers of the world are more or less a random convergence of events, having very little to do.
Yeah,
with,
I feel that. I do.
Think about this is what always annoyed me as a kid, and I could never articulate it until here recently. But like whenever I would hear an historian, and nowadays it would be like an historian on TikTok or something like that, who's like, dude, if we didn't do this one thing, they'd have won. And it's like, just please shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, there's no one thing why the Romans fell. There's no one thing why Hitler lost instead of won. Bullshit. Just get that out of my face. I don't have time for it. Like, it's a convergence of things. There's no other way to look at it. I don't understand how people go through their day knowing two things about the world. And we all know people like that.
Certainly. We could talk about Rome all day in here. I can guarantee it. But I wanted to connect this to something a little bit. Yeah, so this thing about Adolf Hitler, though, I think you are right that it's a convergence of events that can lead to someone like that and then the destruction of the planet. Oh, I have two thoughts. Let me finish this one. So Hitler and doing his thing. I think it's a convergence of events. I think there's weight to what you're saying. But I think also it has to require a little bit of a certain degree of instability, a situation that would allow for Hitler to rise. You needed the state of German politics before he seizes everything, for him to be able to seize everything.
Exactly.
It has to be in a calamitous moment.
Let me
if the world is uber stable, or at least people relatively feel that it's stable, or they don't have anything to lose. Sometimes it's not so much about stability, but about the loss of what is felt ought to be attained.
But I want to
sort of things.
Encapsulate my point like this to make sure I'm not misunderstood. Someone as deranged as Hitler could have been Hitler. You see what I mean? Like, do you see what I'm talking about? Like Hitler was not predestined to be that person. Does that make more sense? In other words, only someone as psychotic as him could have been in the situation to seize this moment in history.
Yes,
but it didn't have to be named so and so. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see where you're going. Yeah, I would say to that, what made Hitler necessarily was the power. He needed the power to become who we know him as, to become who he was. And the power couldn't have come to him if it wasn't for the political situation, which happens sometimes, but not all the time. The instability in Germany. I want to connect it to another thing. Bray, this is the second thing I had mentioned. You had mentioned earlier, like we're just waiting for the next Hitler or something. But there's something funny about this. This is the funny thing. Adolf Hitler is going to be the archetypal evil person because, and I think it'll remain that way. I think it'll permanently remain that way, or at least very seriously remain that way for a long time. Because this reason, if someone equal to Hitler, with the proportional amount of power for today exists and does destroy the planet, there won't be anyone to actually worry about who is the most evil person.
That's clever, Trevor. I have to give it to you.
It's either he's either regarded as the most evil person in history, or the planet is destroyed. Like either the planet is no more. Yeah,
right.
So we're gonna have to become like an interstellar, or not an interstellar, but like an interplanetary civilization before we start worrying about greater scales of evil. Because we only have one planet right now. And you really can only press that button once, and then it's just about over.
And then it'll be what? Khan will be the next cultural icon.
Yes.
I'm afraid so. Well, whenever the CRISPR babies finally come out, that'll be the new level of evil, all right? And that'll be Khan, okay? It's just a little bit later than what Gene predicted, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. If it weren't just a little bit too late in the evening, I would have shouted Khan that moment.
Yeah.
Not going to.
But Bray, I don't know if you know this or not, but just a funny little tidbit here. Khan rose to power or like was in power or something around the year 1996. Okay? So like Gene Roddenberry thought that we would have had genetic engineering completely wrapped up and done by 96.
People thought we'd have a Mars base by now. I mean, people had a lot of thoughts. It's very sad.
Look, I want to return back to the point at hand, right? And I know that Bray is not trying to compare Trump to Hitler. But what I'm trying to say is that, would you give Hitler the football? Would you give him access to it? And Trevor, of course, answered it very eloquently. He would have happily destroyed everyone's world, not just his own. All right? And so, do I think that Trump is willing to destroy everyone's world instead of his own? Yes. Yes, okay. I do.
I'm not gonna.
I see, and this is I probably. I don't know. So, see, this is where a part of me, and I don't mean to go on a Trump tangent, but part of me that's like, I don't think that Donald Trump is ideologically fascist, although I think he is absolutely enabling people who are through their use of him. So it would be very difficult for me to see a world in which Donald Trump is pushing the nuclear button unless somebody is multiple people are grabbing his wrist and slamming it down.
And by the way, I'm not saying that he's going to do something so stupid and out there. I'm just saying, if it came down to it.
Yeah, the guy who has historically been like, oh, you disagree with me? Fuck you. Here, have this tariff, have this XYZ, have this, I communicate with dictators on the regular, and we, dap it up every time we meet. Yikes. But that being said, I got a couple more things I want to try to get to here before we close out. I'm trying to decide which order I want to go in here.
Flip a coin.
Yeah. Can I get a...
Just ask Google, roll D2,
I actually need a D3. All right, number 1. So what's your opinion on... do you feel that we are moving... And this is sort of an open-ended question because it's not really a binary answer here because of just the multitude of factors. But do you guys feel that we are... Let me frame it this way. Do you think we're closer to the use of another atomic bomb or further than... Hang on, I'm gonna have to have a number for this.
Yeah. We need a time
So,
frame
do you
or
think
something.
that it has? So, in 2020, it was 75 years since we dropped the atomic bombs in August of said year.
Okay.
So it's 79 years, roughly 80 years since the use of the bombs. Okay, I just saw this message. So, my question was going to be: do you think we're closer or further than another, say, 75 years to the next use of the weapon? And then tag this on the end of your answer, perhaps. Would you want to survive if it got to a point in which it was global? If there was a situation, this is more like the funsiest question that I always try to include. If we got into a situation where it was like Fallout, which is romanticized in a way, but obviously it wouldn't be carbon copy the Fallout universe or the whatever particular persuasion of fiction that
No,
you
nobody got
enjoy.
clever enough to build vaults. Yeah, we don't
Right.
really have a lot of those. Yeah.
No. The short answer,
If
no.
it was something even remotely close to something like that, where it was possible to survive, but it would be completely unlike anything you've experienced thus far in your life, would you want to? Or would you be happy just blipping out in
Well, I'm
a
basing my opinion
blast
on
or
reality,
what?
and the reality
So,
is that all ecosystems just, I mean, they literally just collapse.
sure, but perhaps there's still some time for you after the
Yeah.
drop if you
But I
survive
lived in like an
initially.
underground fallout shelter with one or two people.
Yeah, I mean, if the death of the planet may not be immediately imminent.
And I can't stress that enough. The planet will not cease. It's just that like
Right.
it'll be an extinction level event, and then a new biosphere will take place in the old one.
That's
You
right.
know, but like I don't have to be there to, and you wouldn't be there to see it either. It's not going to happen.
You would be
in
there for
50
the
years.
first half century of just
Yeah,
devastation.
it's going to take
sure.
it's going to take thousands of years.
I think like if I were to answer this question of would I want to be there, strangely enough, I'd say I would. Only because like I mentioned earlier, we become somewhat familiarized with this idea that everything is relative. It's all relative positions. There's a reason why 9/11 and the atomic bombs are held in this similar regard, even though the death scale is so different. I think it's a term of relativity, and the reason why I bring that up is I think even with nuclear devastation, even with a cacophony of just sound and then death, and in that moment that makes what's his name, the old guy from Part 4 of Star Wars,
Ben Kenobi.
Ben Kenobi. That sensation where he has to sit down, like a billion voices suddenly rang out, and then we're silent, and he had to sit down. Even with that moment, as strange as it sounds, even after the dust settles, due to the sheer oddity of life and the relativity of joy, relativity it's a calamity sometimes one way, because you can stub your toe, or like you can go through a breakup and suffer what feels to be like a traumatic, like PTSD sort of thing, but at the same time it goes the other way too. You can suffer such a calamity like that, and yet there will necessarily be times where you will smile and you'll laugh at something, especially jokes about the nuclear holocaust, because what can you do but laugh?
And look, I'll tack on something to Trevor. Last words. So if you told me beforehand, Steph, you will survive, you will have children, you will live, not a normal life as opposed to what you came from, but you will live a full life. I'd say, okay, fine, I'll do it. Whatever. All right. But here's what I would say about that. I wouldn't raise my children to know any different. I would not raise them with and this would be so selfish of me, but like my knee-jerk reaction would be I would not raise them, I would not teach them, I would not help them understand that that we were not long for this world as a species. I would not educate them to such a level that they would understand, genes and DNA and so on. There'd be no point. why not just do a simple life somewhere where they have much more marketable skills of survival, like, you know, for their children and so on.
So before we get into this why and why not thing, we should establish this. So you think that no matter what, any circumstance, if there is the nuclear holocaust, there is no reality for humanity to continue?
No. I'm telling you that.
Please.
Like, it is so unlikely that it is zero. Okay? Like, it approaches zero. Like, there's so much under us, so to speak, and I really hate to use it that way. Like, it's not as though we're more evolved organisms.
I see where you're going, though. Please,
but like, there's so, like, just look at a very elementary school food web, and you'll understand in 2 seconds how this all comes apart. You know, we have so much stuff around us that we rely on, and so on, that if we change the environment, because the nuclear bombs won't kill us. They just won't. The environment will change into a situation that we are not evolved to handle. And that will be the death. That's exactly what happened to the dinosaurs. It's going to happen to somebody at some point. You know, mass extinction is coming. It can't be ignored. It's just up to us whether or not it's the nuclear one.
Right. And, you know, I think something that's really poetic about the way that this episode is ending is that we've spent a lot of the episode reflecting on death, obviously, but the different ways in which people cope and deal with death relative to time or immediate impact or emotion or things of that nature. And the question that I left with here is, if you could survive global thermonuclear annihilation, would you want to? And I think it presents a sort of interesting opportunity, which is a reflection on death. You know, when you ask people, like, how would you want to die? Like, would you want it to be quick, or would you want to know that you were dying? And people have differing opinions. Sometimes I waver into the camp of, you know, well, I feel like I'd want to reflect on my own passing, like know that I was dying, and be able to experience that sort of feeling of like the confident, like the utmost confidence of knowing you will die. Like, despite the fact that we all should have that, like if somebody said in a week you'll be dead, it's like it's a very different feeling than at some undisclosed time in the future you will perish. I think it's a very interesting poetic coincidence that the last question is sort of the same manner. And what I mean by that is, if you did choose to survive, you are now not only met with the realization that, well, I'm going to die, but everything is dying with me. Like, the entire world as we know it, like humanity, is dying with me.
Inside of, right, you know, 500,000 years, it's all going to change.
And that's an opportunity to, like, die knowing that everything is dying with your generation, you as a people. Like, you are it. And that's a very interesting state that only people who could be there at that time in that place could experience. And I mean,
actually understand.
Right. What is life if not just like I said a few episodes ago, just a collection of experiences? As much, you know, sort of nitpicky disagreement we may have had about that, it's like, if somebody presented me with that, it's like, how could I possibly say no to, even if it was overwhelmingly like despair and just sort of sadness? It would be like the ultimate challenge almost to continue to go on and somehow find some semblance of meaning in a life where that's it. You are among the last people to be. I don't know. That's very interesting.
Well,
but yeah,
this has been a We Mortal Coils.
This has been a very whimsical discussion about the atomic bomb. Happy,
I mean,
yeah, right.
Oh, we're gonna do one more. We're gonna do one more before Cribbis.
Those somber frowns upside down.
Yes,
I forget the dates.
Yeah. Let's see what we can pull off.
We'll do something.
Yeah, but anyway,
very good.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Go and check out. We've got a lot of good material. We've got a year's worth now. So here's to another one.
Yep, here's to another one, boys. And we are out.